welcome to you. I'm Ellen O'Shaughnessy, coordinator of the Conversations and Coffee program. Happy to be with you. I just came back, and I carry the spirit of this Cultural Arts Center with me everywhere, and somehow, no matter where I am, and I was in St. Louis for a conference, I'm going to meet someone, an artist, whatever, the first person I met. Sister Toma Swanson. You know Toma? I love Toma too. She comes up to me and she says, I'm going to have my work at the Cultural Arts Center in April. And it was just such a beautiful evening before 4 days of, work and play. But it set a great tone. And I just want to say, isn't this place wonderful? Yeah, round of applause, huh? To come home to and be with all of you is a joy. And very, very much a part and fiber of this place is our artist today, Tom Baillieul. And he is present in being lost in his paintings. I walk by often on Thursday seeing him engrossed in his painting, but also in administration and facilitating for other artists the exhibits of their works. It's wonderful, isn't it? Yeah, another round of applause. Yeah. Tom, administration is the challenge of the psyche, isn't it? It's one thing to enjoy the fruit of administration, but it's another thing to go through the process.
Way back, quite a number of years ago, I realized I had opportunities for myself to make exhibitions possible for other artists, and found that it was an area of need in Columbus to, if you know of an exhibition space, putting out calls and working to put together shows that are really attractive and allowing artists who otherwise wouldn't have venues to show in a chance to show their artwork. And there was a lot of gratification that came along with doing that. So I don't look at it as administration as such, as just making opportunities.
Ah, that's a great way of saying it. Making opportunities. Well, thank you for that. And looking back in your history, you grew up with a mother who was an artist.
Yes.
And you absorbed all of the love of the art that she was about. In the meantime, you were going to museums, and you were going to concerts, and you became an artist by just observing. And then, tell us what happened. You went into geology?
I have 2 degrees in the earth sciences, but in terms of art, I didn't start making arts in any real sense until after I left home and became an undergraduate. Designated artist syndrome in the house kept me from really trying it before then. But I had a very enriched upbringing in terms of all of the arts: theater, music, dance, visual arts, arts library at home. So.
Beautiful. Yeah. And as you worked in the sciences, you were always sure somehow to be taking an art class. You came here to the Cultural Arts Center, and was that 1997?
1994, I started painting Wednesday nights here with Tracy Steinbrook.
Isn't that great?
Yeah. And I've always considered art and science to be 2 sides of the same coin.
Mm-hmm.
There's creativity and imagination that goes into each. There's a lot of thought that goes into creating a piece of visual art. Almost everything I have here, I've thought very much about the physics of light, of the chemistry of pigments. There's a lot of science that goes into it.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. And you and Deb, your wife, your spouse, Deb, are celebrating your 47th anniversary. Wow, on last Saturday, with your 2 children and 3 grandchildren.
Yes.
And you were in the Peace Corps together, 1971 or so?
Well, I went in 1971. Deb came over a year later. So.
And tell us the relationship of this, the name of this, through an open door with the language of Bestoina. How that came to be.
Well, let's get into that a little bit later.
All right.
As we talk about how this show was put together and how we searched for a title.
Wonderful, wonderful. And Evangelia, you're going to be part of Evangelia Philippidis, who is the curator here. You will be with us as you take time from teaching at Columbus College of Art and Design. And what's that mean?
A bug. No, there was a bug.
A bug. Visited by Mother Nature here. All right, we'll take it away. We're so happy to have you.
Well, I was going to ask Evangelia to talk for a minute about the process that we went through. As the artist, I mean, I could have pulled together a show on my own, but I really wanted to have an independent eye that would go through my body of work and pull out things that she thought really represented the span of my artistic career, as well as coming up with groupings and all. And Evangelia and I have known each other for quite some time, and most recently, Deb and I have been in your classroom talking to some of your students about life in the world of art in Columbus. I asked you to, if you'd be willing to curate this.
Absolutely, and it was an amazing opportunity for me, and I was very humbled and honored to do this. I've known Tom and Deb for, they said, quite a while, and to be immersed in this body of work. I'd seen a lot of pieces that they had done, so I knew, and I'd seen a lot of Tom's pieces because of several shows that we had been in together, but I never imagined the scope of work. And if you think this is something, which I do, you should see the work that is not included because we just don't have a big enough space for it. So when I came on board, we discussed a lot. How were we going to do this? Were we going to do it as a because it was chronologically? Were we going to do it by technique? Because there's fiber pieces, there's painted pieces. How are we going to put this together? And each time we met and we looked through the work, any of those issues could have worked. But there was one particular piece, well, let me back up before I get to that piece. So I started looking at it from the point of view of a journey. This is the journey of Tom's life. And so we kind of both came to the conclusion that it should show, and because he's a geologist and a scientist, it should show a combination of a personal as well as a scientific journey. And so that's how we started culling through the work. And if you take a look around, and every time I come in here, I'm amazed at how wonderful this work fell together. And it's in its diversity of both style and material. And so, starting with the beginning of the universe and mankind and Africa, which is the center of the beginning of humanity, and then moving through to some wonderful social issues that Tom addresses in his work as well, and then back into the universe and into nature. And it was very easy to come up with it, you know, through colors. And it was almost as if all his life he has been working for this visual journey to be shared with other people, even in a subconscious state. So it was an amazing trip for me. And so the journey was going to be part of the title. And then,
well,
we'll get to that.
When I first proposed a show here, and I went through the full jury process we had, lucked out that I got a high enough score, that, you know, I've got a time slot here. But my working title, you know, in that proposal was So Many Ideas, So Little Time. But then when Evangelia and I started talking, and she pointed to a specific painting that I had over the mantle at the time she came to the house, and if you've come in through the front door, you'll see two paintings there, one of which is the large self-portrait, but the one next to it is a triptych, and relates to my time in the Peace Corps in Botswana, Southern Africa. And I, as a Peace Corps volunteer, was assigned as a geologist to fill a staff position with the Botswana Geological Survey. And the space I was given in lieu of an actual office was the optical laboratory, where all the microscopes and other instruments were housed, and I had a desk in there. Mine was the only air-conditioned space, which was kind of cool. But I discovered, you know, after I had been at the survey for about a year, that all the local Botswana crew members, the members of the staff who weren't in the professional grades, had nicknames for all of the white professionals. And I said, oh, that's interesting. And I asked, you know, what do you call this person? What's this guy's name? And then I finally got the courage up and said, do I have a nickname? He said, oh, yes. And I said, will you tell me? And he said, yes, we call you the open door. And I took that as a compliment. And so, you know, as we were talking, that one painting out in the front, the triptych, is a piece that I did for the Clintonville Arts Guild annual challenge in, 2010 or something like that, on the theme of doors. And I said, well, in Botswana, you know, I had doors. I had the door to the rondable that I lived in when I was doing language training in the village, and then there was the door to the flat that I was given when I became a geologist with the survey. And then third is the tent, you know, tent flaps, and sitting outside a tent while I was doing field work. And so, you know, that kind of led to this theme of journey and doorways, and the idea of, you know, taking a journey through the open door. And Evangelia, you know, picked up on that, and, you know, this idea of everything here, you know, represents a journey. And I'm going to stop talking in a second to just allow some dialogue to start. But I want to preface that by saying, you know, almost every artwork that I produce is narrative. You know, for me, it tells a story, but also, you know, I present the viewer with kind of a snapshot image and invite them to create their own narrative around it. But each piece then has two narratives associated with it. So there's the one that the image inspires, and the other is everything you see on the walls here, there's a backstory to it. And that's kind of my narrative.
And that's why we work so well together, because I consider myself more of a visual storyteller as well. And that's what I try to teach to my students. And so it became a really easy symbiotic relationship. You know, we almost read each other's minds in terms of, oh, yeah, this, and so both of us being storytellers kind of worked through this wonderful story that you see here, so.
And I do have to really thank you for how you grouped pieces that really, when we finished hanging this on the Wednesday afternoon and we stood back, and it was kind of like we were both blown away totally, because individual pieces or a couple pieces had appeared previously in other shows, but seeing them in this massed arrangement and realizing how well the different artworks talk to each other, they communicate with each other, and I owe a lot to you.
It was all a team effort. It really was. It's really nice when you have someone that sees the same vision that you do, and we were able to do that and agree on everything, and that doesn't happen very often. You know how artists are about egos, and but we didn't have that. We just kind of knew that this is the way it was supposed to be, and so it's not all mine. It's our doing.
Okay. All right. We'll share. But I'd like to throw it open. Questions, comments, anything. Don't be shy. Don't be shy. Bev.
Well, I took class with Tom for quite a few years with Tracy Steinbrück upstairs, and always was so intrigued by different things that he came up with. He always had ideas, and he was always using other materials, and then when we would have the critique at the end of the class, you would find out what it meant behind the visual piece itself, and that's what was so intriguing about all of Tom's work. And sometimes, like I said, you can see he's used twigs, he uses fabric type things, which he didn't do in class, but he would bring other things in so that you could see other mediums that he worked in. So I really appreciated being in his class and learning more about his process. And it was really fun to watch him work because he really thought about what he was doing, and it really shows in the end product. So kudos to the whole show, because it really does hang together. And wow, it's really a testament to all the years that you've been doing this.
Thank you.
Don't make us pick on you. Because I will pick on people and say, pick your favorite piece and tell me why you like it. Thank you.
I'm just curious why you didn't keep all those final faces in sequence.
I think that was a decision made when we were hanging as to space and how we wanted the themes to kind of move from one theme to the next. So there was an aesthetic judgment, color-wise and size-wise, as well as not wanting to break up this Caribbean tropical wall, but we still wanted to have the three of the smiley faces there. That series, and I'll point out, I tend to work in theme lines, so the smiley faces were one theme that I worked on for a year, came up with 11 different paintings in that. I have themes related to time in Africa. I've got science-based, what I call my travels in time, space, and spirit theme line. I've got Columbus views as a theme line. So, and those are kind of all represented in the way things are grouped here. Yes?
I love the bird right in the back of you.
The canary.
It gives me, you got it into the, like the earth, and then you got the hot summer sky and the cars, and it gives me a lot of feeling to that. And it's like a hot summer day being polluted, and we got the bird in the middle of the planet.
The inspiration for that was, I was at, I think, a gallery show somewhere, and somebody had done something with a bird cage. And I looked at it and I said, bird cages. And kind of what pops into my mind. The other thing that happens a lot with me is that I have the inspired moment where the final image comes into my head, and then it's a matter of just working to bring it out in canvas or fiber or whatever medium seems most appropriate.
When was this piece done?
That was done in 2009.
So,
and
beginning of global warming too.
Well, I've been following global warming since 1983,
Right.
but in terms of public consciousness, and trying, hearing all about, climate denial, global warming denial, I said, no, I need to create an image to challenge that. And so, having seen the bird cage, wanting to do an environmentally themed picture, and saying, okay, canaries, coal mines, you better pay attention. And this came out of that, and the idea of creating a cage that looks like it has latitude and longitude lines on it to represent the Earth, came from another project I'd been working on to create a logo for our green team at the church I go to. So all these things come together when I do a work. And I go for reference images. This probably had 6, 7, or 8 different photographs that allowed me to come up with a realistic view of traffic on a highway, city in the background, the canary, of course. I had to find a picture to come up with a nice representation of a canary. And that got into a jury show with the Ohio Art League that the juror was Ron Pizzuti. And I talked to him at the opening, and he said, oh yeah, my wife saw that and said, Ron, that has to be in the show. I said, oh, okay. So.
I think the bird cage is a representation of all the people who are trapped in their cars.
Yeah. See, this is what I love, is I create an image, but I want people to create their own narrative to go along with that image. And I'm frequently very surprised what other people see in my work.
And I saw something different. I saw the bird being caged as inappropriate because they hurt my sense of freedom. Repeat that.
Jean's was saying that she sees the bird in the cage as representing being locked up, not being free, and that she would thinks that the bird should be free. I put it in a cage because that's what coal miners do, is they have the canary in a cage when they go down into the coal mine.
And the other thing, I'm looking at the traffic and I'm thinking, I'm stuck in traffic, so I'm trapped. And that's feeling caged as well.
But the other great thing about it, too, is that the bird's looking right at you, and it's talking to you. It's actually saying, hey, wake up, people. Okay, so there's so many levels to the work. You were going to say something?
Yeah, just a comment about it, particularly the bird in the cage. It gives me It gives me the impression that there is a sense of bringing in the vantage point to the point where you can see the bird and everything reaching over or out to the horizon. But if you were to pull back a little bit, you would probably see the bird being suspended inside of an apartment. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, I mean, as I say, I create an image and I let people take it wherever they want and build their own story about it. I mean, I've had paintings that I've done, and I know specifically, what I want people to get out of it, and still find that, in some cases, it's a difficult piece to look at. people will create a narrative to try to come up with a more positive resolution to the story than what I intended. So yeah, I like to mess with people's minds.
I want to go back really quickly to Inga's inquiry as to why all the smiley faces aren't together. And just real quickly, the journey started, as it started going around, and when we came to this, of course, this lovely Polynesian, South tropical thing, and then that it's another world and another country, and then we went into some of the social issues that are going on with the detention camps and the trade issues with China and our veterans and the violence in our streets. And so it was kind of like jarring you out of this ideally kind of a thing, because it's South America, Cuba, those, and then the immigration crisis that's going on. And so that was one of the reasons that we didn't group all the smiley faces.
It's the colors, right?
Colors and the story that it was telling. So, yes.
So I have a question. I've known Tom for only a couple of years, and I remember when I discovered he did quilts, and I was kind of blown away. When I walked in and saw the show, I see the three-dimensional Polynesian thing. Is there a medium that you want to try that you haven't tried yet? And what would it be?
Is there a medium I want to try but haven't tried yet? Well, I have in mind, and I have notes for it, on that, people on this side of the hall can see it better, the bamboo and shell map. This is a current map inspired by the charts made by the great navigators of the Marshall Islands in Polynesia, which represent currents as well as islands. And I've used that now 3-4 times to represent other journeys, other travel. And I have in mind working another one in plexiglass rods. I'm intimidated by that, so I haven't gone any further with that. But that's in a folder in my studio, the idea for that and what the journey would be and what the waypoints would be. I've kind of thought that out. It's just a matter of how do I bend plexiglass? It's expensive, so you have to buy a plexiglass rod. So I want to know that I can do it before I mess it all up.
Yes. I have some ideas. We used to do that in school. I'll take
Okay,
them out.
all right. Good, I'll take a class with you.
No. Yes.
Yes, I just wanted to say the blue one that's got all the dots in it right there.
The Polynesian one that you were
Yeah.
just
Yes.
Yeah, you know what it actually relates to me? It gives me the impression of it being a complex atom like maybe uranium-234, or some kind of a complex atom with a lot of electrons orbiting the nucleus.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, because, all I can see is a bunch of dots, and then I can see these pathways that appear to be forming a circle.
Mm-hmm.
And so it gave me that impression.
Well, yeah, and uranium-234 is very ephemeral, so.
There's no uranium-234.
This piece, and you'll see another one over here, the small quilt in the lower left with the blue background. 1970s, had a subscription to National Geographic. They ran an article on the great navigators of Polynesia, and there was an image in that article of one of these current maps. And that just kind of hung around in the back of my mind for several decades. And then I finally got to the point where I said, I want to create my own idea of a journey using the style of those called reveliths. And so the first one I did was life currents, which had bamboo slats in a wooden frame, very much like an actual rebolith that hangs in the Boston Museum of Fine Art. And then on each of the shells that were the islands, I picked a rite of passage in modern American life. And so it was a life journey. This one is Currents of Belief, and each of the islands looks at a stage or a ritual practice in one of the world's dominant religions. And then I have another one at home that's called Paths of the Dead, and it looks at different cultures' views of death and afterlife. So, you know, they're fun to do, but they take a long time, so I don't do them that often.
You have to get really close and personal with a piece because everything is written on those tiny little shells. And another great part about that piece is that there's so many dimensions because it's not just the blue background and the bamboo and the shells, but then the shadows that they cast give you another dimension and another part of the journey. And so that was a must the minute I saw it. That's got to go in there. So.
Yeah, again, yeah.
Inspiration. It sounds like you have a lot of different things that inspire you to do some of your work, some of your travels, maybe some, like the current map that you saw. Do you have a list of some sort of things that you still want to investigate, or does it just come up like when there's a theme for the Clintonville Art Guild? Because it sounds like you really hone in on whatever, you know, if there's something coming up that inspires you to really investigate that.
I can't shut off the ideas. Moleskine produces little notebooks that are, you know, kind of this size, and I have a stack of Moleskine notebooks. I put one in my pocket anytime I go anywhere where there might be art on display. I keep one in the car. Whenever, you know, I look at images, a word. I was in a seminar, a 3-day seminar of the Internet for Artists, and you know, as one of the breakout sessions, 3 or 4 of us looked at each other's web page and gave kind of a critique of you know, things we might want to change. And looking at one of the other artists' web page, the word chaos was there in sort of a cartoon form, and I thought, chaos. Oh, that could be fun to, you know, how would I depict that? And later in that workshop, in one of the other sessions, I started doodling as we were talking. And if you turn around and you look at the grouping of 4 on that back wall, the lower left-hand one, which is kind of 3-dimensional, with brass rods and sort of abstract forms and colors, that's the doodle that I did, that I wanted to bring to life. So that's chaos number 1. And what I realized instantly as I started working on this piece was that an artist cannot depict chaos. Because the instant that you put brush to canvas or musical notes on a score or start typing a poem or a story, you're bringing order. Artists, yeah, anything you do brings order to it. So chaos is an impossibility to render artistically. But that's, you know, there's 3 pieces in my chaos series. The 2 large quilts over on this wall are also part of that. I like to go for you know, really little topics, you know, not challenging. So the very dark quilt on the left is my depiction of the universe 30 to 40 trillion years from now, when everything has just wound down, all matter is dispersed and diffuse, time ceases to have meaning, and temperature's gone down to absolute 0. And that is the ultimate definition of chaos. Everything is totally random.
Which one is that?
The dark quilt on the wall over here that has the spirals, a red spiral and the other. And I use spirals a lot in my work as they represent either infinity or eternity. And a lot of traditional cultures have the spiral as a symbol. And then the brilliant colored one over there, again, I was trying to think, how would I do chaos in fiber? And another, not quite a doodle, but a drawing. And initially I was going to do that as a cutout. All those colored pieces were going to be cut out and somehow put on a stiff backing. But then I went down to this was at the Quilt Surface Design Symposium, and I went down to their vendors area, and I found this piece of blue pattern or fabric, and I looked at it and said, oh, I have to own that piece of fabric, and it became the background. And so this was done at the time where the LIGO detectors in Richland, Washington, and down in Louisiana, the gravity wave detectors during their final test runs actually detected gravity waves from the collision or merger of two supermassive black holes like 8 billion light years out. And that just inspired me to build this quilt with radiating arcs coming out from the central, those two black holes. And the name for it, Chaos Chirp, comes from the fact that when these gravity waves were detected, the scientists converted the waveform to sound. And so you could actually listen to one of the most powerful events in the entire universe, these two huge black holes coming together. But the sound that you heard was about 1.5 seconds of chirp. And it just the absurdity of all that went into that piece. Yeah, Joanne.
Sort of to build on what Beth said, and you talked earlier about process, which always fascinates me, but inspiration and process. And what I thought you said earlier was sometimes you get an image in your mind of what you want, and I'm sure it must vary, but then other times the inspiration might be a word, like chaos. And so how much, when an idea that's in your notebook or whatever, whether it's a note or an image or whatever, I'd be curious a little more about the process of how much finding the right material dictates what you can do, or or do you sketch it out along the way, because you were talking about there, just how do you go from A to Z?
Well, a lot of it is just intuitive. The inspiration is there. Frequently, a full-blown image will arise in my mind, and I'll think about it and get a sense of, is it best done if I do this in fiber? Do I want it more abstract? Do I want to go out and get really representational images to work from? I'm comfortable working in both fiber and paint, and so those are my go-to media. But I will frequently add embellishments, like on all of these smaller square pieces that are very geometric. There's 4 on that side, 3 vertically on this side. All have some type of an embellishment on them. They all have gold leaf put on them to kind of unify them as a series. And the inspiration for them, on this wall, the lower left-hand corner piece, was directly inspired by a piece of commercial art hanging on a wall in a sushi restaurant that had sort of squares and rectangles in wood, different colored wood pieces. And I just looked at that and said, oh, I was going to try to do that in pieces of wood married with pieces of canvas, small canvases. Excuse me. And in the end, I chose to just, I'll do it in paint and then start applying other materials to it. So, things evolve. Sometimes the full-blown image that I have, as I'm working on it, it mutates, it changes.
It's never a straight line for me
Yeah.
to see, I'll tell you that right now.
There's another part to that, which you did last night, and I'll just share this. Where you've been saying for a few days, I want to do another stripe painting. And what you did last night is, I'm going to go up and look through all our photos. I want to do another stripe painting, and I don't know what it's going to be yet. So there is that, also that exploration that you do when you have something you just want to do more of. And, it's whether it's, oh, I'm going to do another St. Ives painting. Let's go through and see what else is there. So you have that also of just wanting to continue what you've been doing.
And nobody's asked about the stripe paintings yet. I thought.
Well, I wondered about
Okay.
this one, what year that is and what you're saying.
This was just a couple of years ago. Deb and I took a road trip from Columbus to go out and visit friends in Colorado. And we went on the interstates and drove across Kansas. And one of the things we noted driving across Kansas is you get out into the rural farmland and all the small towns are dying. They are drying up. The kids have all moved out. The average age of the population in these towns is 70. The stores are all boarded up. Very depressing in that sense. But also, as we were driving along in western Kansas, you'd look out towards the horizon and there's these forests of wind generators out there. And I looked at those and immediately clicked on the idea of juxtaposing the old and the modern. And the change is coming to Kansas. What was there for a century and a half with a small family farm type thing is going away, but it's not that the whole land is no longer valuable. On people they're coming up with new ways of earning a living, and the kids in some of these families are working now for the companies that run the wind power generators. And they're actually, the salaries are far, far higher than what they would have gotten by working the family farm. But I wanted to juxtapose the traditional, the old windmill that's kind of broken vanes on it, no longer really working, with the very modern. And I go back to the stripe style periodically. I don't do them all that frequently because they're difficult.
Tell us about the stripe style, Tom. Tell us about the stripe style, Tom.
That goes back to 1976, 77. Deb and I are leaving Botswana for the second time. We're in the capital city and we stop in at the National Museum and Gallery. And there on the wall was this very large painting called Strata that was all these wonderful horizontal stripes. I can't even bring it completely to mind anymore. But again, this is one of those things that sticks in the back of my mind. And moving ahead a decade, and I wanted to start painting scenes from our time in Botswana. And one of the most fascinating things that we experienced was December of 1976. I'm doing field work in the northern part of the country on the edge of the Great Makati salt pans. Think Bonneville salt flats. And you get a sense of the scale of these shallow depressions that are most of the year they're dry and white with the salts. But when the rains come, the dry rivers that all drain into this shallow depression start flowing with water, and you get the shallow lake that's enormous in size, but the water seldom gets more than 3 feet deep. But somehow the message gets out to the flamingos, and thousands and thousands of flamingos come down to this part of Botswana, and they build their nests out in these shallow lakes, raise the next generation of baby flamingos. And it was right at the edge of my field area. My field area actually lopped out into one of the shallow embayments in this lake, and took our guests out to see this. And as we approached the shoreline, there were some flamingos that kind of walked away from us, heading out. But then we raised our eyes and you looked out at the horizon, and as far as you could see, the horizon is on fire. Hundreds of thousands of flamingos, and this brilliant neon pink line across the horizon. And so that was an inspiring image. And so probably 1983, I did my first striped painting to try to capture that. I don't have it anymore. It was very rudimentary. But it led to, I kept coming back to that image, and this was one of the most recent versions of it. And so that got me into doing striped paintings. I realized that they work well with broad landscapes or seascapes, things that have broad horizontals to them. And I keep going back and I keep challenging myself to vary them. Well, you can see, one of my challenges was, what if I did a striped painting in just black and white? Well, what's black and white and African? It's a zebra. And what I try to do in these paintings is do the very geometric horizontals and then juxtapose in the foreground some organic shape, something that is a contrast texturally to the stripes. Yeah.
Well, looking at this pottery, and I'm wondering if had your tree go up into the window on purpose, or was that just an accidental hang?
Which one? The one with the woman sitting on the bed?
Your tree is just going right up the tree.
Well, I wanted, in that painting, I wanted to have the day outside that room to be a bright, sunny, normal American afternoon to contrast with the somber emotion of the seated figure. And
Well, I was
oh, which one?
the real tree up above.
Oh, the real tree in the winter. Oh,
Is that acting?
no. I mean, I don't think we even thought about that. We were looking at the wall.
Yeah, we did. There's no such thing as
okay,
an
yes,
accident.
it was intentional. Yes.
Yeah, it's all intentional.
Yeah.
Well, that painting's a night picture. The one with the seated figure on the bed is a night picture.
Yeah, that was, I mean, again, there are certain paintings, there are certain images, there are certain stories that I actually feel compelled to bring into existence. I have another one between the restrooms. I'll let people look at it on the way out. Another theme line that I work in involves origami cranes. And this comes from, again, back in the 80s, teaching Sunday school for 5th and 6th graders and coming across the story of Sadako and the 1,000 Paper Cranes, and learning that the origami crane has become the Japanese children's prayer for an end to all war forever. You know, very powerful image to me. And so I've done a lot of artworks, paintings, mixed media, actually done 2 Christmas trees now with foil origami cranes as the decorations on them. And I keep trying to think of new ways of using those. Well, I have the one painting between the restrooms is called The Unanswered Prayer. And it's disturbing enough I can't hang it in the house, I'm not allowed to. I'll give you a little of the backstory. When I put that image together, I will frequently draw out my image on paper, get the composition set, and then transfer that to the canvas and then paint it in. When I was doing the layout during the evening class here at the Cultural Arts Center way back when, I found as I was completing that sketch that I was crying. And I just said, okay, I'm done, rolled it up and went home. And then over the course of like the next day and a half, painted it. I mean, it was that important for me to get that image out. Robbie.
I'm just curious, which one is your oldest painting? I was just curious, which one is the oldest painting, one of the first ones that you have painted in the show, and which one is the newest?
Well, the interesting thing about that is when Evangeline and I went through and she made a selection and did some initial layouts and all. And I was looking at these, at her layout and looking at them, and all of a sudden it hit me, oh, we don't have my earliest piece in this. And I said, and I started looking at the dates on all of these artworks that I'd done. And I said, oh, I'm missing 3 decades. So if you go past the main desk here and on the wall on the left, there's a painting representative of the 60s, and then one of the 70s, and one of the 80s. So that's where it all began. And as a matter of fact, my first social justice piece is in that grouping. So yeah, everything else in here is pretty much from the 2000s with, I guess, the 2 canyon scenes, that's the 90s.
Yes, sir.
What inspired you into sewing?
The which one?
Sewing
So,
Oh, why did I get into sewing? When I got married, Deb was making clothes. She's quite an accomplished seamstress. And so here we are living in an apartment, and she's got her Kenmore sewing machine out, and she's cutting these odd shapes of flat fabric, and then starts stitching them together, and all of a sudden comes out with this 3-dimensional piece of fabric that you can actually wear. And I said, okay, you have to show me how to make clothes. And so we started, she took me to Joanne Fabrics. She helped me find a simplicity pattern that only had 5 steps to it, and helped me pick out a fabric. And I made my first shirt. And so I really liked the idea of working in fabric, and I kept going, and I made Renaissance costumes for myself. I did a lined sport coat, all these things, and lots of shirts. But then moving forward, 2005, Deb takes a class at the Quilt Surface Design Symposium and runs into the instructor, who's Rosalie Dace, South African quilt artist and teacher with an international reputation. And Deb comes home from that and says, "You've really got to take a class with her." And so the next year I signed up for, I think, her weekend class on African textiles. What could be more fun? And if you look at the quilts here, the second one from the left that has the tree in it, Deb said, before you get into this class, you're going to be in with a whole bunch of women who have been making art quilts, for decades, and they know how to piece and do appliques and do quilt stitching, and you ought to try to do a small, do a small quilt to get yourself so you feel like you can hold your own, or at least talk to these people. And so I said, okay. And so I was sketching out an image. And again, this comes from mythology, African mythology about the birth of the people. And so I started doing that quilt. And as you notice, it's got stripes. Well, I started building a quilt using the style that I knew would work. So that was my practice piece for that class. The one next to it on the right is a piece related to the AIDS epidemic in southern Africa, in Botswana specifically. That's the one I actually worked on in that class. So my first piece that I finished, well, we went back to Botswana that year for a month, and then came back and I finished both of those pieces. The one on the left with the tree where man began, I entered into a show called Sacred Threads, and it got in. I said, oh, well, that's kind of cool. And then at the end of that show, I get an email from the curator saying, we've been asked to take a subset of this exhibition and send it to Houston for an international quilt show. Can we send this with it? I said, oh, all right. And then at the end of that, I get another email that says, oh, we've now been invited to show it in Dollywood for another month. Can we have it for that long? And I said, yeah, I guess so. So it was on the road for almost a year, I think, in the end. But I said, okay, not bad for my first try. People with parking meters are going to turn into pumpkins.
And Tom Baillieul, thank you for taking us through this journey with the Open Door, with the event of the Philippidus, with you. That was wonderful. Thank you so much.